you please stay out of that space over there? Thank you. All right. Hello. Good afternoon. I believe it's actually afternoon in all of the time zones for our panelists for today. We are going to give people, I know that people take a little bit of time to get into and organize, so we're going to take a little minute here for that to happen. And as we do, I want to welcome everybody who's joining us. If you've gotten onto this link, then you are going to find out about how to approach strategic fundraising and the preparation for that. We just to remind everyone, we started out this series in mid-July. It was a 4-part series that we expanded to a 5th part, which is today. We called it our Hot Summer Topics. These hot summer topics, we are definitely, if you're in Chicago or you're anywhere in Illinois, it is no longer summer, so it is appropriately done. That is appropriate that we're saying that that we're coming to a close on this several part series, because the summer is definitely over. So just to remind everyone, this is GROmentum Lab. You have joined us. GROmentum Lab is a business accelerator in the cannabis and also hemp space, serving social equity applicants and people who would qualify as social equity even if you didn't need to. If you're in an ancillary business, if you are in a hemp-related business and you're not needing to get a license in the cannabis space, you have still come to the right place. If you are a plant touching in cannabis proper business, you've also come to the right place, or if you hope to be. You do not actually need to be a license holder to be on today's conversation. But to remind everyone, GROmentum Lab is here to support this community that has been identified as social equity, either living in disproportionately impacted areas by the war on drugs or other aspects of your background that would have qualified you as social equity. We are here to support folks in getting into business. We provide all sorts of resources. People who know us have been with us from the beginning because we were helping people with their license applications. But we also have a business accelerator. We will be launching our business accelerator, hopefully still before the end of this calendar year. You know, the timing on things have slid in Illinois across the entire gamut, largely because our cannabis industry licenses haven't been completely announced yet or even identified at this point. But because we are here to support other verticals as well in the hemp space, in ancillary spaces, even if that doesn't completely get sorted out, we would like to launch. So our application process is open. You can go online under programs and accelerator and apply. But our goal is to support, first of all, to seed fund folks in the launching of their business, to provide education. It's a really thoughtful, groundbreaking educational experience where we combine entrepreneurship training and professional development with sort of an MBA light and also cannabis technical training. So a bit of training in each one of the verticals and in CBD related and hemp related businesses. It's a really good survey course from a cannabis technical perspective, but also a really appropriate and thoughtful MBA light. So you really do emerge with some ability to work through a lot of different skills and a lot of different stuff, let's say with your team. This is really focused on your C-suite. So you and 4 friends or you and 4 other executives from your business will come and learn together. And in the end of the day, within 16 weeks, you launch your business. We hope to match you with investors, and you're off to the races in a very supported program. So we're excited about our launching this program. It's been a very long time coming. We've been working on it. We've been working with experts from across the industries and universities and whatnot. And at the end, I don't want to steal any of the thunder from our great panel here, but at the end, happy to answer questions about the accelerator program as well. I do want to mention one other program. If you're in a business that really seems like it should be an ancillary business to this industry, but you're not sure how to break in, or you think you want to get into a business that's an ancillary business, we also have an apprentice program for you. Again, you can ask questions at the end, or you can apply online, but we are working with different ancillary companies that provide skills or provide services to this industry in construction and security, in business to consumer, all sorts of different companies that we work with that would be happy to have you on as an apprentice. So we could talk more about that possibility. I got muted out there, huh? That's because I have a conflict with my phone. And my phone is no longer on. So if you're interested in our GROapprentice program, we'd be happy to talk to you more about that. Well, let's get to today's program then. And with no further ado, I want to introduce my esteemed panel. Thank you guys so much for joining us. I know I don't have to tell this audience that that this topic seems to be at the heart of every conversation. I mean, these days, there are a lot more conversations happening about the licensing process here in Illinois. However, until 3 weeks ago, every conversation that you get into was always about what the plan is to raise capital, or how is that going to go? Why is that? What are we going to do about that? And so to be able to launch your business, to be able to sustain that business, as you know, in the last 9 months, I think everybody has seen a huge reason why it's not just about launching, but sustaining over the dips in the economy, the things that we don't know, the black swans that are out there, like pandemics and other things that may have a huge impact on what happens with the future of your business. You need to be able to sustain that over time. So to be able to really think about what you need and how you're going to spend that and how you're going to go and raise that money to begin with, that's why we brought this panel here today. In most industries, there are 3 different ways you might consider raising capital. One would be to have done really well in a business that you started and reinvest your profits. And a lot of people have decided to sign on with MSOs, thinking that if they get it, they'll ride the wave, they'll make a whole bunch of money, and then they'll reinvest that in the application process in the future. And there's nothing wrong with doing that. You might learn a lot on the way. You may not, depending on what your contract was like with the MSO. But you may also have been in a different business and you've saved a lot of money, you want to reinvest it. Some people don't have that opportunity. If you've been working not in a situation where you've been able to really raise your own money, then that's not an option. Another way people tend to raise money is through debt. And taking out a loan is very typical in most businesses. Of course, in cannabis related businesses, that's not really an option to you. So what we're going to really talk about today is that third way, which is raising funds through equity. And there are a lot of tips and tricks and things you need to know about it. And I know that it is a source of anxiety for a lot of people. So my hope here today is that you can get a much better sense of what it means to do that. And you have some clarity and you have control over what it means to do that. And you can start to set out on your way to build all that you need to prepare yourself for that. And then if you are prepared, sure, it'll be nerve-wracking, but it won't be nearly as nerve-wracking as if you get into a situation and you can't answer questions. You get into a situation and the situation passes you by, because you get that chance, and it's kind of like 8 Mile. You get that chance and you've got to pounce on it and use it. And maybe I should be using the Hamilton reference instead these days, because that's maybe a little bit more updated. Okay, so without anything else, I'd like to introduce the 3 panelists we have here today. Jessica Velazquez, I'd like to first introduce you. Thank you so much for joining. Jessica is managing partner and founder of Indiva Advisors, LLP, a CPA and financial services firm, focused on assisting cannabis businesses and owners navigate the unique accounting, tax, and financial industry changes. She brings more than 18 years of experience and is firm's main authority on IRC 280E, IRC 471, and general tax matters for individuals, partnerships, and corporations. She hails from traditional business, having worked for public accounting firms like PricewaterhouseCoopers and Ernst & Young, not KPMG, which is a good thing around here these days.
I was going to plug it later.
Yeah, as well as having built and managed corporate tax departments at Zappos.com, SHFL Entertainment and Corporate. She holds a Master's of Science in Taxation from DePaul University, a Bachelor in Science and Accounting from SIU, and is a licensed certified public accountant, certified fraud examiner, full disclosure, this is my little ad. She is also the treasurer of GROmentum Lab and is also a Chicago Southside native. Yay.
Yeah.
So thank you and welcome so much. We're so happy to have you here, Jessica. Awesome.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. It's a pleasure to be here speaking with you all on this topic.
Thank you. And we have Sumit Mehta. Sumit is a cannabis industry futurist. I love that, futurist. I want to be a futurist. A global strategist, a recognized speaker, and the founder and CEO of MAZAKALI, a San Francisco-based cannabis investment firm. Sumit sits on several cannabis company boards and serves as the Banking and Financial Services Committee for the National Cannabis Industry Association. Sumit is the former director of finance for the ArcView Group. And prior to entering the cannabis industry, because he couldn't have been doing that for so long, Sumit, full-time in 2016, spent 20 years at Wall Street on Merrill Lynch, Raymond James, UBS, and most recently JP Morgan. 13 of those years were spent in Chicago, which was also involved in the craft beer movement, the Center for Advancing Domestic Peace and Wings. And it's really interesting, the craft beer, because I wonder how much similarity or relevancy it will have to craft growing. So I would love to talk about that more too, Sumit. Sumit studied economics, math, and physics at University of Texas, and then received an MBA from the University of Michigan. Sumit holds investment banking, brokerage, and investment advisory securities licenses and runs MAZAKALI in San Francisco. His short description of MAZAKALI, this is great. We help investors place capital and help companies raise capital only in cannabis. Really key, because there are definitely key considerations that are different than in other industries. The MAZAKALI green paper, and that is something that I sent out. Hopefully all of you saw one of the green papers that I posted, but there will be another one we'll talk about later. Remains an excellent source of deep trends in the cannabis industry. Now with over 50,000 subscribers and in its 5th year of publication. So it's a real place for thought leadership. I wanted to add, but I realized that we already talked about Sumit's deep roots in Chicago and did spend about 15 years here. So thank you so much, Sumit. Really glad that you're here. I know that you're doing a bit of travel right now to kind of keep COVID and West Coast air a little bit more ventilation out in other places where you are right now. So thank you for joining us from the mountains of New Mexico for now. Appreciate you being here.
Thanks, Amy.
And finally, although certainly last but not least, we have Brandon Banks. Brandon Banks and I serve together on the Olive Harvey Advisory Council. I think a lot of people know that Olive Harvey is getting into technical training for workforce development, and we've gotten to know each other through that effort. He is the co-founder and chief operating officer of Natural Selections Dispensary in North Glen, Colorado. After years of working for several Fortune 500 companies, including McDonald's and JP Morgan Chase, so maybe Sumit and Brandon, you may have crossed paths at some point, and Philip Morris, Brandon moved to Colorado, transitioned to the medical marijuana industry. Beginning his career as a master grower, he cultivated several award-winning cannabis strains during his time at Green Man Cannabis, including High Times Cannabis Cup winning genetics, Drawing on both his cultivation and finance background, Brandon branched out and co-founded Natural Selections in 2013. With the company now doing over $5 million in annual revenue with 25 employees, Natural Selections is now looking to bring their operations to the Massachusetts market. Originally from Chicago, this University of Illinois alum now lives in Denver, Colorado. So we miss him, but we talk to him periodically. Thank you, Brandon, for being here. And full disclosure, Brandon did apply to this dispensary round in Chicago. So like many here on the call, he can definitely relate to what some of the experience has been that you all have gone through. So just wanted to, yep, great, awesome. And I can see that I've frozen. Can you guys still hear me? Are you able to hear me?
Yes, Amy.
Okay. I think that my screen is somewhat frozen.
We're able to hear you, Amy.
Okay. All right. Well, now I did want to just say that for anybody who's got any questions, AJ, please remind me. It seems that that you're able to ask a question through the question asking capability. Is that right? Or is it, or is it just in the chat? We'll just get them in the chat.
We can do either, but you can do Q&A as well.
Okay, great. Great, okay. And so I'm sorry that I seem to be really static there, but I will, hopefully things will just get normal again in a minute.
We could definitely hear you, Amy. So
okay.
Your visual might be off, but we can hear you.
It's just so amazing how that happens. All right. All righty, so here's what we're gonna do, everybody. We're gonna do, I'm gonna just ask our panel a couple questions, and what they had asked for was that everybody come and have good questions, which is really going to help me if you're not able to see me. No, it looks like my voice, my mouth seems to be moving suddenly again, which is good. Okay, so I'm going to just ask each of the folks on the panel a couple questions, and certainly I might ask a specific question to a specific person, but if you've got, if any of the panelists, if you have something that you want to say about that same topic, feel free to chime in. And my first question is going to be for Sumit. I had a really great opportunity. I've actually heard Sumit speak several times in the past. And one time that I heard him speak, he talked about a house. He had used a metaphor of a house. And I think it's a really, really helpful metaphor to help the whole thing come alive. So I think it would be a great way to kind of get things started when it comes to raising capital in capital markets. Could you talk about it and talk about sort of what people need to be thinking about as they prepare their approach?
Sure, Amy. I use the metaphor for a house because I think that everyone can identify with that. We've all we've certainly all lived in a house, whether or not we've owned it. But I think it helps to think about raising capital for your business in a very similar way to how you might think about selling a house that you own. And if you want to sell your house, you need to have three things done. You will want to have all your paperwork in order. You'll want to clean up your house and make it look nice. And you want to invite as many people to your showing as possible. And for a business, these steps are quite similar in that taking care of paperwork is crucial and important to ensure that investors can do adequate and complete diligence on your business. You're likely going to want to get professionals involved with the preparation of this paperwork. The second step is cleaning up your house and making it look nice. And that means providing potential buyers of parts of your business with a nice experience. The practices that companies use to go out to raise capital are quite clumsy. And I would say that given how quickly things have changed during this lockdown, if you were doing the same things you were doing in 2019, you're quite antiquated today. And what I specifically mean by that are practices that involve a quilted patchwork of software that ends up being a less than desirable experience from an investor's perspective. I've been an investor for a long time, and I am constantly shuffled from an email to a PowerPoint to a Dropbox to a DocuSign, which is an inefficient process for both parties. And this inefficiency is precisely what drove us to create our digital capital platform that is intended to make it easier for investors to invest and for companies to go out and raise capital from those investors. And the third step I mentioned, Amy, is you want to invite as many people to your open house as possible. And the shutdown has really helped with this step for companies, as going digital has literally flattened the globe. It costs the same now to meet with someone across town as it does to meet with someone across the country, because we're all doing it on this format. So our advice to companies is clean up your paperwork and make it institutional quality. Provide potential investors with a seamless and pleasant experience. And look at your total investor market as the entire world, rather than segmenting investors into perhaps circles that you may have access to. And that Amy, I think sums up what you might be referring to as my analogy for how raising capital is similar to selling a house.
So a couple things that I would ask for clarification on, and then you made me think of another question with that. So first, some clarification. So you said you, as an investor, it's a really unpleasant experience because they have to get shuffled around for different kinds of paperwork. Could you explain what that means? Because I don't know that people necessarily have an appreciation for that. What do you mean by the different kinds of paperwork that they would experience?
Sure. So I'll talk about the process and the paperwork both, because the process involves someone emailing a potential investor a PowerPoint about their business, going after that investor to determine if they're interested, and then exposing them to perhaps a data room where they can see more documentation around the business. And then if the investor is still interested and wants to invest money, they then send them documentation via HelloSign or DocuSign. And so as an investor, I receive an email, I then go to PowerPoint, I then go to a data room or Dropbox or Google Drive, and then I'm going to DocuSign, which is inefficient and not transparent. And one of the tenets that I believe is crucially important in having a transaction that is a relationship, not just a transaction, but the beginning of a relationship, is transparency. And the way that we promote transparency is by having all of these steps consolidated onto our platform so that investors are able to go from initial outreach to final paperwork in one setting. And issuers, the companies, are able to see what these investors are doing from a digital standpoint, so that it becomes very clear who is interested in spending time on your documents and your PowerPoints and your raise, and who is simply deleting your email and not looking at it.
Right. So this whole issue of transparency has become a huge issue in these neck of the woods these days, because the lack of transparency with regard to, I mean, can everybody even imagine if you all knew as you applied for these licenses, who's looked at it, how long they've spent in each one, whether or not they went back to you and asked you questions, whether or not they received the answers to those questions, what your scores were as they were scoring them? That's transparency. Understanding what the entire rubric was, understanding where they are in the process, understanding what went into their process in time-wise, time spent. Did they just blow it off? You don't know anything when it's behind a black curtain. And what you're saying is, no, we're completely transparent. We allow that. And because of that, it facilitates a better relationship between the two parties. Right now, there's a horrible relationship going on between the applicants and the state. And I'm just using this as an example because it's where technology and process failed in the relationship between the two. Because the state and applicants need to get into a relationship for people to become owners.
I think that's right. And I think there's also a potential there's a potential inequality in the relationship between people that have money and people that need money. And so if you're out looking for capital and you're talking to folks that have capital, that inequality can manifest itself in many ways that are unpleasant over the long run, and potentially can take advantage of people that are willing to sacrifice more than they need to in order to attract capital from those specific investors. And that's something that we're very cognizant of. And we believe very strongly that if you're going to own a piece of my business as an investor, we need to have a long-term strategic, mutually beneficial and symbiotic relationship. And the second that relationship trends into the waters of being a parasitic relationship, it's no longer beneficial to either party.
That's a
And
great
that's something
point.
that we promote transparency and honesty and communication simply to facilitate what we believe is the beginning of a transaction or beginning of a relationship that is healthy, rather than a transaction that is parasitic.
Right. That's great. That's great. Thank you, Sumit. So I got a question, and I'm gonna really it has to do with something else you said, but I'm gonna open it up both to Jessica and to Brandon in that they are from here. So like, just put on your Chicago hat for a moment. Culturally, I understand Chicago is, and Illinois in general, but Chicago for sure is a place where people are really apprehensive to seed new projects, and where there might be a lot of people going, I don't really know if I can turn to an external community for my project. Like, I want to be working side by side with someone rather than somebody online. I'd want to test that assumption, because I've heard that before, but I want to test that assumption with Jessica and Brandon. And then I want to end up with Sumit, who can talk about both your experience in Chicago, but also your experience with why the World Wide Web is a good vehicle for seeding projects.
Brandon, I think,
Sure.
yeah, I'd love for you to start
Yeah,
this.
no problem. I'll go ahead and hop in here. So, I'll give you a practical example. I mean, first off, I understand, like, being from the south side of Chicago, sometimes there's some fear, some apprehensiveness around going towards outsiders, not only for capital, but who are going to amount to being business partners. Our very first investment that we got as a company in Natural Selections was $1.2 million. It was from friends and family, not mine. My business partner is not a person of color, but he did have access to capital, somebody he went to college with. Her father, I should say, lent $1.2 million to the company. We had a great relationship. It worked out incredibly well for both the investor, and we learned a lot from having an entrepreneur who was from a completely different space, but brought their unique skill set to make sure that our business kind of not only succeeded, but thrived. With that being said, they lived all the way in Atlanta. We saw, our main investor, our, very first business partner, literally twice a year at most. We were on weekly phone calls with them. This is kind of pre-Zoom, but we were on weekly phone calls. There was always a active line of communication via phone calls, texts, sent them weekly reports and weekly updates. But realistically, you can do a lot of these things remotely and still kind of foster the same sort of camaraderie, even if you're not in the same locale. So again, I just sort of try to dismiss that myth, encourage folks to frankly think outside the box. You're going to have to in this industry. We're going to have to, we're already limiting the amount of folks who want to invest in our company just because it's cannabis and the federal illegality of it. So we need to sort of cast a broad net. So I would never let, distance be a detriment, to any sort of investment. I've had overall a very positive experience getting an outside investment from someone who lived several thousand miles away.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think from my experience and certainly my clients, investors are typically not in the same state. There's a lot of investors across several states, funding from East Coast going into the West Coast and so on. Quite frankly, at this point, there's funding coming from international borders into our country, right? And funding here. So I would agree, it's a pretty global space right now. Any limitation, I think, really should kind of come back to the concepts that that were discussed earlier, right, around the house, and those classifications as to who you want to partner with. I am a firm believer that not all money is the same. So it is key to seek those partners that your values and mission align for the overall benefit of the investment, of the relationship, and that will support you in other ways, as Brandon mentioned, possibly, again, just that entrepreneurial wisdom that comes with their experience. So in most cases, it's more than just the capital that you're actually getting. You're getting a team of folks that are going to support you because they want you to succeed in an ideal situation.
That's awesome. And it is true. So it is back to what Sumit really kicked us off by talking about, which was it's a relationship. It's not just a transaction, right? So really great. Thank you. So Jessica, before you mute yourself again, I got a question for you. So as an operator, what do you need from a record keeping perspective if you are seeking capital? I think this has to do with some of what Sumit was talking about in terms of cleaning up your house and putting your documents in order. What does that mean exactly?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this speaks primarily to that point number one that Sumit said, was around paperwork. This is very key here. Record keeping in the industry is essential for several reasons. I think, from my CPA perspective on audit, we certainly want to make sure all of our clients are protected should and when they get to that level. So that's key there, certainly for any audit, either federal, from an income tax perspective, or regulatory for that matter, from your respective licensing agency. But record keeping, I think, Amy, really is one of the fundamentals of financial best practices. And again, this comes back to what Sumit said, which I couldn't agree more, sort of what is the process around that financial integrity that you're presenting to investors. Are there appropriate controls around key items such as cash, such as inventory, such as purchasing? Who is in control? Making sure that, again, the financial sort of best practices are being taken into account, and people are held accountable for these things. I think, sort of time and time again, I see that folks are wearing multiple hats. And one of the things that typically kind of goes by the wayside is accounting or financials. People may come to this industry with the concept of, hey, I only need financials once a year to do my taxes. Well, that's really no way to run your business in day to day. You have to know what they are to effectively run your business. And investors know that. Investors know who knows what's going on in the financials and who doesn't. It's very clear, not just in the decks that are presented to them, but in conversations. And so that's why I think this is so important, having the fundamentals there so that when you are ready to present and seek funding, you have what is a solid premise for would-be investors, and your operation is not built on a house of cards.
Right. It seems like it also is right in line with this whole thing that we've been talking about. When you're building a relationship, your relationship is built on trust, and trust means that you know what's going on. You're going to take someone's money for your operation. You better know you better be building trust with the person that you're going to be using it the way you say you're going to be using it, and you're going to know where it is. It just seems kind of logical that it all falls into line with this longer term relationship building.
They're looking for good stewards of their money, as well as great entrepreneurs, right? And folks with vision and ideas and how to grow their company. But if someone's giving you millions of dollars, they want to know that there's good practices there when it lands.
Right, exactly. That's Yeah, that's a discipline that maybe not everybody is skilled at, but really needs to be there for you to build that trust ongoing. So Brandon, as a serial cannabis entrepreneur at this point, because you've had a bunch of different successes, what would you tell a your first time capital raising self, to most help on their path to raising capital? What do you wish, like for instance, that you knew before that you now know?
Yeah, I think a couple things. First off, you need to look at raising capital as, if not a full-time job, then at least a part-time job. It's going to always take a lot longer than you anticipate. Case in point, the very first dispensary project that we launched here in Colorado took us between, I think, between 9 and 12 months to raise cash. And this is at a very attractive terms. We're like, hey, we're giving away a very large chunk of our company.
So was that before you had licenses or after? Like
licenses in hand, licenses, locations, we're paying rent, we have the license we needed.
You had the license, you
Yep.
had the locations, but it still took you 6 to 9 months.
Yeah, exactly. And I'll just break down the numbers. We needed about 800,000. This was a small grow at the time, but we needed 800,000 to build out our cultivation facility in Boulder, Colorado. And keep in mind, we were paying rent on this out of pocket as the founders, probably for a year and a half prior to that. Along with our dispensary location required about a $400,000 build, actually $300,000 build out for our actually storefront dispensary location. Then we needed about another 100K in burn rate, just pre-operational expenses. So needed $1.2 million to launch this business. Again, licenses in hand. We had all the experience, and frankly, our investor, or the terms we were offering our investors, were pretty aggressive at the time. We were like, hey, we're giving away 30% of this company. Let's go for it. But it still took longer than anticipated. So these things, always will take longer. I've done a couple of new capital raises since. I've learned that you really need to be pretty systematic in your approach, right? It goes down to, creating spreadsheets, creating follow-ups, consistently sort of checking in, emailing, crossing potential investors off the list if they're not a good fit. Going down the line, as Sumit said, as far as the documentations and the transfers and chatting with your attorneys and all of that stuff. So it's a long process, and you need to think of it as such. You need to have systems in place to track your progress, or at least track your leads, especially coming from a position where you may not have access to capital and certainly don't necessarily trade in those worlds, I should say. It's even more important, to kind of leave no stone uncovered. You have to really kind of, reach out to any of your friends, their friends. It is a slog. I'm not gonna,
Right. It's a big grind.
It is a grind. It is not something that is excessively easy if you don't necessarily have the means, or your family doesn't have the means off bat to fund these things. It is definitely a grind.
So I'm hearing it takes a lot longer than you think.
Yep.
I'm hearing it's a lot of discipline and tools set up, and you just have to cast a really wide net.
Yeah, and I think
those are great.
Yeah, one last point. You have to remove your ego a bit. This is going to be a partnership, a business arrangement. Any investor worth their salt is going to ask for certain controls of the company, or certain safeguards or guardrails. Initially, there was a sense of frustration, like, oh, you don't trust us to run this company? Or what do you mean? Oh, we have to give up this? Like, oh man, this do we really want to partner with these guys? And if these investors are well-intentioned, then these guardrails are typically not to harm you, but just to sort of, keep the project moving. And frankly, if you're putting up millions of dollars, they're going to want some sort of controls, or at least some assurances that things are moving in the right direction. So kind of be prepared for that back and forth there. It's not like someone's going to cut you a check and let you run free and run the company how you choose to. There's certainly going to be some controls and safeguards in place. And I don't know if I was quite prepared for that early on.
So that's actually awesome. And that then takes me to a question I want to ask Sumit. So that's like a perfect segue, because, you're going at 100 miles, 150,000 miles an hour, and you're in one headspace and investors are in a different headspace. And it seems like until you got into a different headspace that you could accept what they were looking for, you were maybe a little offended by the asks, or by how this was all going, or what exactly it was. But it took you to kind of get over that, to say, you know what, it was really reasonable what they were asking. So Sumit, I know that you interact with a lot of investors because of the mission of your company. So can you tell us what exactly it is that an investor is looking for? And do you think that those who might be interested now in investing, particularly in social equity companies, I think now there's probably a bigger desire for that to diversify a portfolio for social enterprise purposes than there ever has been before. So can you tell me, like, has the mindset changed for an investor? What is the mindset of an investor? How would you look at this?
I heard a couple of different questions, Amy. I'll try and unpack them. I smiled when you asked what exactly an investor was looking for, because if any of us had an answer, raising capital would be a science, not so much an art, and we'd have a perfect solution to doing it. It is a full-time job. It is a very difficult job, especially in this environment. And there is a distinction between what an investor requires from an investment, which is a return, which is also translated into them doing well, and what an investor might desire with an investment, which is impact, which is also translated into doing good. So yes, there is a large requirement in virtually every instance from an investment standpoint for a return. Otherwise, that money would be deemed charitable. And there may be a secondary requirement or desire to have positive impact. The other things you mentioned around what is going on in the world and how that might have impacted how folks are viewing this, there's certainly a lot of forces at play that are very positive from an investment standpoint and specifically translate into a positive outcome for the folks that may be on this call and folks around the country that are coming from disadvantaged backgrounds that are taking advantage of the social equity, at least the stated social equity goals of certain states, and are looking to partner with meaningful capital, strategic capital, and capital that comes with good intentions to grow their businesses responsibly. And those forces include, of course, the labeling of the industry as essential, which brings it into a lot more investors' field of study than it would have been if it were just shut down. It also includes this focus on this large focus and very appropriate focus on the systematic racism in this country. And when you have minorities that have been punished so unfairly for the exact same decision, which is to have a commercial relationship with a plant, so that they're sitting in cages instead of boardrooms and instead of nice rooms like you and Brandon and I are sitting in, that is simply unsustainable. We can't move forward as a society by leaving people behind. And we can't do this responsibly and say we're doing it responsibly with any measure of not going back into the communities that have been not just underserved, but punished, disproportionately punished, and bring them forward into having an equal opportunity with those that haven't had that disproportionate punishment because of a very simple decision. And I think, Amy, you've heard me speak. I'm a big proponent of saying that as long as nature is illegal, freedom can't exist. And I view the lens of cannabis the same way. It's a vegetable, it's a plant. And while there's a lot of fuss around it, and perhaps somewhat appropriately so, there's a large component to just looking at it as what it is and helping those who have been punished by policies around it, policies that are constantly questioned from so many angles. And when I think about one answer as to why these policies have existed, it's economics. And when we start questioning these policies, when we're able to reverse them, then we're perhaps able to lift people out of the places that, frankly, we've put them in as a society and to bring them forward. I think I segued from the original question, but I think it's appropriate to talk about what we can do together
For
to
sure.
help each other and move away from what I would just call predatory practices,
Mm-hmm.
whether they're lending practices or investment practices that some folks may have suffered and continue to suffer because of.
So do you think that, just do you think that it is more on the minds of people who are investing in cannabis, this whole topic? And I really mean kind of walking away a little bit from this whole what might be considered predatory, but they didn't consider themselves as predators, to now perhaps more of a, oh, well, there's a different way to have a relationship, and it's important that we do this right. Kind of, I don't know, like social responsibility, or do you think, or do you see it much more? I mean, I understand that's your perspective, but do you see that in the investors that you talk to, or is it really just, are we talking theoretical? Because it seems like the news would warrant it.
I am seeing it in some instances. I'm not seeing it as a giant change in mindset, but I am seeing it on the margin have an impact. And while we can all agree that there's no perfect solution, I think we might also all agree that all of the work that's being done around the country through media and lots of conversations like this one, that work is helping shift mindset. And so while there will always remain plenty of room for improvement, I am seeing that shift in mindset on the margin amongst folks that have either put aside money for specific social good, or folks that perhaps may not have, but now incorporate social good as one of the criteria that they would have to have satisfied in order to deploy capital into an investment.
Okay, great, thank you. So then, Jessica, let's fast forward. And let's say you have social equity applicants, you see that they're making deals with investors. What would you caution your clients about as areas of risk management as they move forward? Both if you had an advisor who's a social equity applicant and you know you're actually working on behalf of the founders, and investors, like how would your advice to them be different?
I think for the applicants, and again, those seeking capital, one of the big risks I caution is making sure they understand the economics of the terms that they're agreeing to or talking about. I've seen, again, things move really fast in the industry, and sometimes folks are making decisions without really sort of speaking to their team, counsel, all of their advisors to make sure they understand what it is exactly they're getting into. There's definitely been more sophistication on that side in recent months and years, but again, I see it every now and again for smaller operators, and particularly, again, folks that are not well funded or capitalized. And so I do strongly recommend that you have the appropriate team on your side that you can seek counsel from when you are at that point. And so besides sort of what's in the agreement and having that good counsel next to you, I do come back to the fundamentals of seeking the right partners to work with. And that works for both the investor and the applicant. It's very important that there is a unified, mission and views on how the business is going to operate. Brandon brought up a very key point earlier about that ego, and making sure you understand what you're willing to do, to give up, to do on your end. To secure that financing and that partnership with your would-be investor. But again, it does come back to, I think, having great relationships and understanding what that is. I'd like to circle back a little bit quickly, Amy, though, on something that Sumit brought up, because I too am seeing a different investor in this space. In our firm, we service investors, people that put capital into the business. We work with their companies to do accounting. And so the investors that we're seeing are more aware of the climate in which we're operating in, given all of the racial issues that we've encountered over the last few months. and certainly now issues within respective programs and how we can make those better. So I'm seeing a much more like conscious capitalist approach coming to the industry. I do believe that because it is essential to again, to Sumit's point, it brings a different type of investor to the table. And so those are good things, certainly. Those are great things, particularly from where we've been in when the industry started a few years ago.
I
So
love
those
it.
to me are positive things. And then maybe one last point, there's even different ways of approaching this from meaning the capitalization. I was on a panel this Saturday, a panel on Saturday with Asia from Trellis, and she was describing her approach to seeking capital for her company through a B Corp. And sort of, again, this approach of conscious capitalism and how you're bringing investors to the table is now, I think, more than ever going to be mission aligned for those that are seeking that type of partnership, in addition to what they bring to the table in the form of cash and expertise and so on. So again,
conscious capitalism. I love that.
I think it is a different landscape, and I hope to see more of this. And again, I think it's certainly the social unrest that we've seen has stirred quite several pots, no pun intended, but across the industry. And I think we're going to see more of that happening, and again, bringing different investors to the table.
Great. So thank you. That's great. I love that. I'm going to definitely beg, borrow, and steal conscious capitalism. So Brandon, I got a question about culture. Now, I know that your background was in banking, so you already had some experience in highly regulated space, right? You probably had to get CE credits every year and, take all sorts of classes. But one question I had for you is, how would you describe what it's like to operate in a culture of compliance versus what one might expect if they've never been in a highly regulated space before? And how does that influence how you operate and how you manage your financials from a day-to-day perspective?
Yeah, good question. There is a night and day difference between, and full disclosure, I started cultivating cannabis in 2001 in a basement in Chicago. So I have experience on the other side of the industry, and unfortunately moved to Colorado where things were relatively legal in the medical sense in 2010, and then went on to full regulation in 2012. So I've seen the entire gamut of the space, right? So night and day difference between running any sort of small business, I should say, if you were, on, either the cultivation side back then, or if you were selling product, or you have any experience in the gray or black market. Once you have a regulated, and every state is moving towards the seed to sale tracking. There's very few sort of gray area anymore. There's no caregiver models. So once you have the license and a license to sell or cultivate cannabis, for most applicants, it is going to be the single most valuable asset that they have and have had in their life. These licenses are valued at north of, several $1 million in some instances. These Illinois licenses will be valued at conservatively $5 to $10 million, depending on who you're asking. So they will be single-handedly probably the most valuable asset that most people will have ever seen and ever had to sort of take care of. With that being said, due to the regulatory framework, compliance always has to be at the top of your mind every time. And not only that, it borders on redundancy as far as when you're operating a business. For instance, we would get a delivery of edibles, right? It'd be 50 edibles in a box. Want to make sure they're, some simple job, count the edibles, put them in the system. Not so simple, right? You have to double check the manifest. You have to double check where they came from, make sure you cross-reference the company that sold it, make sure their license is valid, make sure that every single piece of edible has been itemized on that manifest, and then have a manager double check it and sign off on it, right? And then make sure that you organize all of this paperwork in case you have a state audit. You have inventory checks 2 or 3 times per day. And this isn't necessarily mandated by the state, but due to the value of the license and the fact that, compliance is everything, you can't afford any sort of misstep, it becomes, second nature almost. We had to implement at one point, every bi-weekly sort of third-party compliance audits, meaning we'd have another company come in, audit our facility from top to bottom, make sure there was no missing product, no grams were missing, make sure that all of our records were in the proper place, sorted by date, sorted by month. You have record-keeping requirements where you have to keep 6 months of records on site at any given time. You have security requirements that require you to have, typically 90 days of recording on hand at any given time. Plus, all of your managers and employees need to be able to, management, I should say, needs to be able to access and address any of those issues in case a state regulator comes up. So there's just layers upon layers of, different sort of compliance aspects that go into running a business. I mean, it's a common joke in the industry that you're not in the marijuana industry, you are in the compliance industry.
Right.
And to be frank, it does, for a new entrepreneur, it takes a bit of the fun out of it, right? It's a bit of a slog to have to hire extra employees just to double check somebody's work. It's a bit of a slog to have to, crack the whip on someone if they misenter a gram or two or misenter a sale. But unfortunately, not only does your license depend on, in most cases, your livelihood may depend on these things. So you have to take it with the utmost amount of care and sort of, make sure you guard any of those regulatory.
Well, I would characterize that description as nothing short of shocking. So, okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, so just one brief word from everyone, and I just want to, we'll have these guys stay online if there are some questions. I haven't seen any questions come in yet. So I would just ask that, please come with your questions if you have any. One brief word, we'll just go around the horn. I know that capital markets, this industry was flush with capital previously. And then it started getting constrained. And then the pandemic hit. So while sales are continuing and they're doing pretty well, capitals have become really hard to come by. What is your outlook? What's each of your outlook on the potential for people to raise capital in the environment that we're in right now over the next 6 months to a year?
I'll jump in. I'm fairly optimistic. Cautiously optimistic is probably the better term. There is a little bit more interest in the space in general. There's certainly more interest in social equity applicants. I think most people who are interested in cannabis and invested in cannabis, or even experienced, especially experienced investors in the space, have recognized that winds of change are here as far as state regulated schemes and things of that nature. So I feel cautiously optimistic that, the capital markets will respond and investors will open up. There's also safe banking, which actually got pushed. There's some part of the Safe Banking Act got pushed into a recent bill in the House. So, we're very hopeful of that. I think that's one thing that, again, for operators who, and hopefully some of these folks on this call get licensed either in Illinois or another state, but another personal example, I can't get life insurance. My life insurance rates have shot through the roof, and I can only get some sort of, investment policy through some sort of, crazy broker, and it's some more of a financial service than actual life insurance is which I want, which is actually what I need. I've had about 5 bank accounts shut down. So I've been through the ringer around all of that, and it's getting better, I'd say month by month, year by year. So cautiously optimistic that there's some wholesale change on the horizon that will allow for access to capital.
Yeah, I guess they say you're not really in the cannabis space unless you've been demarketed from a bank. So anyone who's been demarketed, you could say, I've arrived. Awesome. Jessica, what is your perspective on capital markets? And then we'll end up with Sumit.
Yeah, absolutely. Why I couldn't say Canna Atlantic earlier, besides me, but that was the panel, y'all. Kind of like Brandon, I think I'm cautiously optimistic. COVID is certainly having a global economical impact. So we've not really seen sort of how that's going to play out yet in the next 6, 12, 18 months. And we also have an election here very soon. So I am also cautiously optimistic. Although I will say there's deals going on now. So I know there's for sure capital for the right companies, the right group of teams, management teams that are looking for them. But it is a full-time job.
Yep, for sure. Great, thank you, Jessica. And Sumit, what's your outlook?
Yeah, I might touch on a couple of things here, Amy. One is health, one is the government tax status. A third may be technology, and I'll just briefly highlight all three of those. From a health standpoint, there's no debate. I think there's very little debate, but the shutdown has caused a fairly significant increase in anxiety. And there's a lot of elevated concern for jobs, for income, and for the future. And in an environment where opioid and crisis almost go hand in hand at all times, cannabis comes to the forefront as an excellent way to deal with stress and with sleep issues. And as a result, we have seen more people consume more cannabis in more places for more reasons every day. The second is, I talked about government tax coffers, and those tax coffers are dwindling as governments are spending money to try and stay afloat during the shutdown. Cannabis has emerged in this environment as the most politically popular industry that creates employment, that generates revenue, and that offers immense health benefits at a time when they're sorely needed. We don't have the data yet, but we are watching CDC data in states with legal cannabis markets to compare it to states that don't have cannabis markets and to see if there's any statistically significant differences in the reporting of COVID and other health-related issues. The third thing I mentioned was technology, and something that we talked about earlier in this conversation was how technology has allowed for folks from all over the world to come into this market. And while the traditional cannabis investor over the last couple of years in the US may have been burnt because of the incredible peak to trough decline in the cannabis equity markets, there are new investors that are looking at this space, looking at it as essential, looking at the government having to do something about it, looking at the health impact, and understanding that this industry is essential, it's recession resistant, it has low correlation with other sectors. Many parts of this industry are growing north of 30%, and valuations are depressed because of what I believe is a temporary capital shortfall. So investing in depressed valuations in an essential recession-resistant asset class is attractive to investors. And ultimately, capital is like water. It flows to its level. And as we come out of perhaps this short step back, which I believe is just one step back to take several forward, I do believe that investors will not just recognize, but act on the immense potential that cannabis has from both a return perspective as well as an impact perspective. And I look forward to us all playing a very large role when we approach that tsunami, that tidal wave of capital. One thing I didn't mention that I will as well is that as we are increasingly confident of potentially a democratic outcome to the election in November, there's also, in line with that, increased confidence because of statements that Kamala Harris has made, amongst others, that there will be renewed focus at the federal level to at least address the federal-state conflict in the industry. And when that happens, the small number of banks that currently do bank the industry will explode, and capital channels will open up in a very positive way. So for all these reasons, I do believe that we are at the cusp of a turn, and I'm incredibly optimistic and excited about what's to come for us and for the industry at large in the months and years to come.
That's great. Now, if people had troubles accessing capital through some of those forms prior, that doesn't necessarily mean that's different now. So getting through this licensing process right now and getting our businesses going is obviously the focus here in Illinois. Well, I don't see any questions. I do want to make sure that anybody who has questions can bring them up. This is definitely the time to do that. We are starting to talk. Sumit and his team at MAZAKALI and GROmentum are talking about working together towards helping social equity applicants to get be placed in the MAZAKALI platform. So we want to be bringing that up as well. And yeah, I thank you guys all for being here, for spending some of your Wednesday afternoon in your time zones, your respective time zones.
And it
Different
looks like
than
there
we
is
are.
one question in the chat.
Oh, it is
Yeah,
it?
yeah, it looks like from
Uh,
Jim. He wanted to
okay.
speak on the sale of a cannabis company in a regulated space.
Yeah, how come I'm not seeing that? But go ahead.
Oh, all right, well, I'll touch on it a bit.
Good.
You know, for Jim out there, I mean, at this point in time, yeah, and unfortunately, due to the introduction that Amy gave me, I actually sold that company, Natural Selections, about I think we closed on that about 8 months ago. So I do have some direct experience selling a regulated business or even selling a license. I've sold about 3 licenses here in Colorado to date. I think it really depends on the market. There is a bit of due diligence that goes into it. More than likely, if you are an operating dispensary or craft grower operator, you're going to be selling to someone else who has experience in the space. There's a lot of mergers and acquisition work being done in the space currently. So more than likely, you're going to be, you know, selling your company to a company that is looking to expand their footprint either in cultivation or in retail. I find the process to be relatively painless in Colorado, aside from the diligence and making sure you have your paperwork in order. I will say that that's been touched on before, but the housekeeping, not only with your financials, but all of your paperwork and as far as investors and all of that stuff, making sure that all of that is clean and in order makes for a much easier transition and a much easier sale. But there is going to be quite a bit, and there has been, there will continue to be quite a bit of M&A activity in the space. So for those who do have licenses, I have found exiting and selling those licenses has not been, frankly, hasn't been as onerous as I would expect given all the regulations.
Gotcha. Cool. Thank you. I now see the question. So let me ask another one. And this probably is for Sumit. Sumit talked about this, but maybe also Jessica. In general, what makes a B Corp more suitable for conscious capitalism?
Well, Jessica's the expert on B Corps here, so Jessica, I think you provide a more complete answer than my overview.
I don't know about an expert either, because I recently learned about it. And that's what I think I love about this industry. Not I think, I know I love it, because there's a lot of outside of the box thinking that's happening across the board from operators really seeking to fund their businesses, seeking to fund capital. The B Corp in general just really aligns around principle and principle in the effect of being socially responsible towards the environment, towards specific initiatives such as racism, etc. And so that type of corporation, I think, again, attracts a very specific type of investor. And so for folks that are looking to really be sort of mission-based, focused on these good deeds with respect to being a good, conscious corporation, I would encourage you to really look at more the regulations or the requirements to become a Corp B certified
Right.
as a potential option.
We definitely looked at that for GROmentum, and it didn't really meet what our mission was. It certainly did in terms of social enterprise and social impact, but when my understanding was that it had more to do with marketing. I don't know, but it's not like you don't get like a tax advantage from what I understood. Is that true, Jessica?
Yeah, I don't think there is. Again, it just is attracting a different type of both consumer and investor.
Gotcha.
I believe Patagonia is a Corp B. And so again, if you kind of look at that company and their principles around sustainability, good practices in climate change, making sure they have a diverse workforce, being active in current issues around racism, etc. Those are the kind of qualities that again,
Right.
a B Corp brings. And I will say this, that Trella is an ancillary company. And so again, they're going down that route. They're not plant touching. But again, other options for folks out there that are trying to find good capital
Right.
investors to work with.
That's interesting. So basically everybody in Illinois, based on the requirements of applying, really should be a B Corp, because all of those things that you hit, they have to have just all of those things met in their community development plans, in their environmental standards, and all of the operating. So it's an interesting thing to consider. There was a question.
I might
Oh,
add
go
a
ahead.
couple things to that point, that B Corps must commit to
Right.
producing a public benefit. And so in terms of what you're seeing out in Illinois, companies do qualify.
Yeah.
Also governance and transparency and accountability standards that B Corps have to go through. So directors, for example, of a B Corp have to consider the interests of non-shareholders when making decisions that involve the company's conduct.
Mhm.
There's also transparency in that the company has an obligation to report to shareholders, not just the financial performance, but social and environmental performance in accordance with their missions. And then lastly, accountability for a B Corp involves the opportunity for shareholders also to bring lawsuits to enforce the company's stated public benefit mission. So that's one group of large differences between what a B Corp does, and therefore attracts a different kind of investor versus a it's just a regular nonprofit or for-profit organization.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for that clarification.
Yeah.
There is another question. It looks like it was really targeted maybe at Brandon, but so Illinois has a transportation license type. I don't know that other places have that. And so people are asking about that, but I think it was something specific to Brandon.
Yeah, I think that's, again, I'm in Colorado, there is no transportation license. So it was easy for me. I can have my employees move product from our cultivation facility directly to our store. There are third-party courier companies that do exist out here in the space, and they're pretty easy to work with. If your employees aren't necessarily available to make that transfer. It's just at a certain point, each different sort of, company or group that you introduce into the supply chain does add a different layer of compliance and making sure they're vetted and having all their licenses, all that. So sometimes it gets frustrating. I do know certain states are, mandating that all of these transfers. I know Nevada, I think California specifically mandate that these things get handled by an official transportation company. I can't really speak to the capability of these firms, but I will say that they've been opened up primarily to allow for smaller business to sort of operate and still have a place in the space. A lot less capital intensive, just need a few employees and a delivery driver. Your insurance costs are frankly pretty high, but aside from that, I think the motivation for these type of licenses is just to broaden the pool of entrepreneurs that can come into the space. Because if you're just saying dispensaries and cultivation, you're talking millions of dollars. So
Right.
I do encourage, folks to kind of apply for those licenses, but I can't really speak towards the profitability or what I would look for in any partnering with those companies.
Cool. All right. Well, I think that is the end of the questions we got. We're a few minutes over. We anticipated we would be. So I cannot thank you all enough for carving out a piece of your Wednesday afternoon to spend some time with us here in Chicago. Thank you, everybody, to those of you who joined us, whether you joined us just today or, oops, it looks like there is, it's a thank you. Great. Thank you, Lisette, for being here. Thank you to everyone for being here and to coming to our series overall. This does conclude our 5th and final series. We just found out that we are sponsoring a series coming up in the next couple of weeks on infusion. A lot of really great aspects of that in terms of that business. So you will all see more about that coming up in the future. In the meanwhile, stay tough while the dispensary license story gets sorted out. answer those deficiencies. Let us know if you have questions. We're happy to help you cure whatever we can. We've definitely been doing that all along. And thank you again to our panelists. Be well, everybody. Thank you.
you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.